Well, Matt Berenc, thank you honestly so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know that you have a ton of things going on, and honestly, you're someone who has single-handedly shaped the way that I think about movement. And I mean that in the most serious way, because the workshops that I was able to do with you as a new trainer in Equinox was my true first introduction into thinking about something not from solely the perspective of an athlete. And I mean, I reference your name. I talk about you all the time. It was really impactful. So from so many different levels, thank you for being on here.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. And I really appreciate you saying that. It's one of those things where I love having been in the industry for as long as I have and being able to work with professionals like yourself. And to hear that feedback. I have a tough time taking compliments personally. So like, I'm trying to think like, how can I make this self-deprecating? But I thank you very much for saying that. And I love the work that you're doing. And I love just the fact that I get to be on here with you.
Well, thank you. Yeah. What was it that drew you towards movement of all things?
I mean, honestly, the best thing I can say is my older brothers. It's a story I kind of commonly tell. It's what got me into the industry. It's what got me down this road of what I do now. I'm the youngest of four boys, and so we're all super close in age. I happen to be the chunkiest of the boys. So when I was a little kid, all my brothers came to me and they said, "Hey, you got two choices. Either you start working out and you start being active, or we're going to beat you up every day." And so I just chose the working out and active part over the beating up. We still got beaten up every day. I'm the youngest of four boys, but that was just brothers. I got into working out, and I started training with my brothers. And to me, my brothers are my best friends in the world. Like they're who I grew up with, and obviously, but we're so close in age and so close just in general. I spent a good amount of time just working out with them, and that just fostered a love for exercise and movement and seeing what I can do and challenging myself. And that led to trying to run distance and seeing I just remember I vividly remember in grade school when we'd have like the track class. It was like track season, and we'd go to a local park and we'd just run around. And it got to the point where they knew I wasn't the fastest, but I would just keep a consistent pace. And I would start off slow, but I end fast because everybody else would die out, and I'd be able to maintain. And it's those small things, like they're just little snippets I can think back to. My gym teacher allowing me to bring our cement-filled barbell, set in to gym class and like show people some stuff that I can do with the barbell and like walk them through. And this is me in grade school, so those are the things that just stick out. Like, oh yeah, that's why I got into this, because my brothers got me there. I had a gym teacher that encouraged me to do it. Like all of these like small experiences that just laddered up to it's just the career I was destined to be a part of, I guess.
I'm gonna pause us real quick because I think that. So it was these moments in your childhood that kind of like spoke to you from a movement perspective, where I think when it's safe to say most of the kids are just running around in circles, perhaps you're running around in circles and running to the left in this circle feels a little bit different than running to the right in this circle. Kind of what's going on here? And you say it sounds like you were obviously pretty active as a kid, right? So you're playing sports, so you have exposure to kind of what a body in motion is like. Was there moments like through your childhood when you're running around with your brothers and stuff like that, where you sparked a curiosity of wanting to really go deep into it, like into the science and the biomechanics, or where did that kind of drop into your life?
I think that was an evolution of my interests and what I wanted to do. The further down the road I got into my professional career in this world, when I early on, I think this is how a lot of it just follows, I guess, kind of the natural approach to movement and movement exploration. I saw it as play. Like I saw it as an opportunity to just see the different things I could do with my body and run around and have some fun. And to me, everything I wanted it all to essentially still have that element of play and exploration when I was doing it. And that was a heavy piece of it when I was younger, because obviously I didn't know what any of these things were. I mean, I'm in grade school, going into high school. I just knew I liked working out. I knew I liked the different things I could try and explore and move in different ways and see how it felt and how it challenged me. And it just grew from that love of movement and exploration. Because I guess trying to think where it would have come from. One of the things I can always call out is, especially when I was younger, I was never scholastically the best. Like I had a learning disability. I don't even know what it is. I never really paid much attention to it. But I
didn't learn what it was.
Yeah, I just my parents took me to a doctor to go through tests. Like they knew something wasn't there, and I know I have the report somewhere. I just I never anchored to it, so I never really paid much attention to it. But in retrospect, looking back at the ways in which I would start to learn how to learn, one of the things that I would call out is I went to a tutor, and he would encourage me to use movement, and even small movements help. And I still see it to this day, to help me like figure things out, like things like counting on my fingers, like the physical tactile act of like moving my hand to get that counting, to like be able to feel what I'm trying to learn. It's the same reason why I can't get away from doing manual, like handwritten notes, because the physical act of moving my hand to write cements the information in my head.
Wow.
Those elements that tie together, where I see, the movement has always been a part of how I've either learned or had fun or grew up or whatever the case may be. And it just naturally turned into, when I coming out of high school, because I loved strength training. I loved what I was doing within that world, where I like, there's a university degree that can focus on training. Oh, great. Went down there. And it basically took what was natural and inherent to how I liked to just move my body and explore and challenge myself. And it put a system and a science to it that I didn't previously knew existed. And now as I get into university and I start exploring and understanding more there, that's now where I can start getting into like, now I understand a bit more of the biomechanics of how we move and all the different elements that underlie what I've been feeling. Now I can put a name and a structure to it. And not to say that there needs to be a structure to it, but it allows me to understand a bit more and be a little more systematic now in terms of how I'm approaching looking at movement and exploring movement.
It's fascinating for me to hear you say that, because one, I didn't know about the learning issues growing up, but how ironic. I mean, you become the director of education at what I confidently consider like maybe the most forward-thinking institution for training and development, and help spearhead a program that shapes some of the most intelligent trainers that I am exposed to in the country. And you do it through what is a language. It is. I really think that movement is a language, and I feel like that point has been driven home more and more the more sports I play, from skiing to jiu-jitsu to Muay Thai. Like, you see that it's very much like you're trying to develop. Why I can't believe that I can't say this word right now. Fluency. Jesus. I was a language major in college. How ironic, right? So you're trying to develop fluency in a language, and you do it by, you learn verbs, right? You learn the most available things first. Mm-hmm. What is a table? How do you say phone? What's a library? The big things that you typically come in contact. So you can learn proprioception in baseline movements, right? Where are you when you're lying on your back on the ground? What does that feel like? Are you aware that there's space on your low back? Can you eliminate that space? Those are kind of like those big words. And then as you become more proficient in the language or the movement, you start to be able to string together sentences. And then on the higher end of it, you can hold a conversation. And then on the even higher end of that, you can hold a conversation in a specific niche of whatever you're talking about. So I may speak English fluently, but I can't talk about physics with a scientist, right? I get stuck. So I hit my limit. And so here you are learning via this language that sticks with you for the rest of your career, in spite of having difficulties in the other areas, right?
Yeah. I mean, as you're talking about kind of movement as a language, one of the things that popped to my mind is that it was a saying that I remember either in his book or one of his presentations, but Gray Cook called out, where it's basically movement is written in the language of feel, like that you feel the movement, and that's where you get to that kinesthetic awareness and proprioception of like where you're at. And I see it, inherently. I have 3 kids, and I've watching each of them grow. Like one of them's, right in smack dab in the middle of their development, just learning any type of movement because she's 6.5, 7 months. And so, you just see like, oh, they're trying to navigate the hands and trying to figure out, but it's all from feeling and sense and getting feedback and figuring out like, how does this work? And then, to your point about my learning difficulties, and it's credit to my parents and the support they gave me. The fact that I don't know the name of it, they never put much stock into it. They just
Love
sought
that.
the help that I needed. The school I was at didn't do it. I was put in the special kids class, which meant I had to line up at the front of the room during either art or music, to miss art and music, to be marched out of the building to a separate building to go to the remedial like math and reading classes. So
How broken is that?
Yeah, that was not the best of experiences. Like in hindsight, like we look back and think, oh man, that was not a great, but it was an old school Catholic grade school.
Right.
I don't think they also knew any better than to let's go do that. But thankfully, it dovetailed into being the position where I'm in now, and even more to that, I also call out I'm a consummate introvert. Like you put me in a room, I probably won't talk to many people. I'll have some good one-on-one conversations, but it'll be a handful. But then I've been up and like presenting and doing workshops, and so there's a lot of contradiction, I guess, or duality to how I when it comes to different parts of my life. Like, left to my own devices, I'll be quiet, but you ask me to talk about movement and science, and I'll get up in front of a bunch of people and talk as much as I can.
Yeah. And that was always, it was ever present. I think back again to workshops that I was fortunate to do with you, like the FMS level 1 and level 2 courses that I think FMS, for example, has a way of communicating movement principles in a really special way that kind of like, once you get on the other side of it, it makes sense. It's like, oh, these are present in everything that we do. These are things to look at and hope to correct if they're inhibiting us, and hope to promote if they're helping us. And it isn't like a be all end all, but it's a very useful tool. But you took something interesting like that. And I think part of this is you were my first exposure to someone who was at the elite level of training within their career. So you were thinking about training and mechanics in a way that was far beyond where I had ever been exposed to, because I had, like a ski coach who kind of grew up skiing and thought, well, I squatted when I was a kid, so we'll probably have some kids squat. So it was always like just kind of trickle down programming from them, but it wasn't specific. And then these workshops that you do, you talk about like developmental kinesiology, and then you're like, hey, let's just consider a child for a second who hasn't been exposed to environmental factors in the world, hasn't gotten a job yet, hasn't driven a car yet, hasn't done anything. How do they move? And I was like, oh, they move flawlessly. I never thought about that. And then you look at it and you're like, oh my God, aside from maybe structural differences in bone length or limb length or things like this, we kind of all start at this spot of phenomenal mobility. And you just mentioned it with your children, right? You have 3 examples of people that overhead squat perfectly. They have great trunk stability. They can step up things and down things. They know how to crawl. And then you told us in this workshop, it's these environmental factors, it's the life things that you build crutches and you build deviations, and then you have to like unpack this in the training realm. When did you draw those conclusions? Because those are deep to me.
I think part of it was, for me at least, a tipping point in my understanding kind of how we were designing moving, like kind of getting back to that developmental sequence and looking at how just inherently we all have the baseline patterns of movement within us, and then we grow and develop. And like I said, seeing it in my kids now, it stemmed from when I injured my back. I guess this is like almost probably about 15 years ago or so. Like it was to such a degree that my then girlfriend, now wife, had to put my shoes and socks on for me. Like in order for me to go into work, like I couldn't do that for myself. She had to do it for me, and then I would, go on and pretend like I could train people. They can in the meantime be like laying down and making sure my back didn't spasm out.
I
And
thought you were going to say that it was so bad that your girlfriend at the time left you. And I was
Yeah.
like, that's got to be
Yeah.
the
That
worst
would've been it,
back
yeah.
injury.
Oh
of
no,
all
she'll
time.
leave me for some. I just talked to her 5 minutes ago, and she was threatening to leave me for something else. So
But I
that'll
digress.
happen. At some point.
Yeah.
But with that injury, I went to go see Dr. Craig Liebenson, and he walked me through just some different patterns on the floor and different ways of looking at how to move and exploration. And then I think that teed me up to really start, because it was personal. And I think that's often for a lot of people where it really starts hitting home is when you reevaluate, because it's truly impacting you, and it's a humbling thing to have somebody put your shoes on for you. You start really exploring, okay, well, what am I missing? Where's the missing link in terms of what I'm supposed to be doing? And it really came back to, am I moving well? Am I moving optimally? And it's the clarification, like it's not perfect. Like there's nobody's looking for perfect movement. It's just, are you moving well enough to perform? Are you moving optimally? Are you leaving things on the table that you could otherwise have? And I think that honestly was at that point when I injured myself. It's like, oh, something's not right. And it's through that started me off to say, okay, I'm going to look at how I'm moving. And it just, one thing led to another, where I dove further. And at that point, like with an FMS, I was already a practitioner, but I was in my initial phases. And then I really took a step back, like, okay, let me really dive into these principles and see where it's at. And then that just one thing led to another. And I started understanding more. And now looking at my kids, my oldest is 4 and change, and watching how he's moving now at this stage, and my 2-year-old and how she's moving, and my 6-month-old and how she's moving. And so like you can see they're at all different stages, but also the common through line there, like thinking about movement exploration and play, like we were designed to move so much, like even when they're static, they're active. So my daughter, when she's 2 years old now, if she wants to go and see something on the floor, she doesn't go and sit down in front of it. She squats and just sits in the squat and plays with it, and then stands up and goes on and does her next thing, but comfortably sits into that squat and just hangs out and does what we were naturally intended to do, is it kind of acts in that position. My son, even when he's like watching TV, he'll be upside down watching TV, like hanging off like for no reason whatsoever. I'll just turn around. He's, his legs are on the couch, but his head's on the floor and he's upside down and he's just hanging out watching. But that's, to me, that typifies, other than like, he's just having fun, he's doing what he thinks is a fun thing to do, it typifies how we are designed to move. We're designed to find different positions and explore different ways of, orienting our body, and not to be stuck in just a truly static, I'm slouched in the couch position. Like there's that, like I said, even when we're inactive, we're active. There's that ability to constantly just have micro movements and things to adjust, and variability to place in the body.
How do you find yourself? Well, actually, 2 questions real quick. How are you seated right now? Are you seated, standing, squatting?
I am seated. I was
so
trying to find the best position. I would do this in one of the things I've been able to cultivate is like a good deep squatter. I can just hang out there for, in 20, 30 minutes, just sitting. But I figured for the actual position of the camera, that might be the best orientation. So I was
trying to do the math on the squat rack. I'm like, all right, well, the J hooks are right there. Yeah. The overhead bar, I was like, he must be. Okay, cool. So you're human, you're sitting.
I am human. Yeah. I do enjoy it. And I see it's comfortable.
And do you find yourself, I don't have kids, but I'm excited about having them one day, because I feel like it's this regression because I live a super active lifestyle and I love it. And I barring anything that prevents me from that, I don't plan on stopping anytime soon. And I'm excited to have kids one day to look at them and replicate what they're doing, just because, like, okay, we're watching TV upside down on the couch today. That sounds great. Do you find yourself from an explorative standpoint, just doing what they're doing to see how it feels or how far off the baseline you are, so to speak?
100%. One of the things that I'll tell any new parent is like, you're going to spend a tremendous amount of time on the floor. Have a fun time just being on the floor. And I say that as be excited for that, but also a preparatory. Like if you haven't spent a ton of time on the floor, that's going to be a new stressor on your body. Like that it's a challenge. But yeah, it's one of the things I love doing is I just with my, I'll go through each one of them. With my 6-month-old, she's in kind of that Sphinx Cobra position where she can push herself up, she can roll over. So I'll just get on the floor and she pushes up, I push up. Like I'll mirror and like just play with her, and that's like that way she's getting some visual feedback, and like it's just spending time with her, and just hanging out. With my 2-year-old, I'll just follow along. If she explores something, I'll squat down, explore it with her, like run around. The 4-year-old, same. Like he's more, I want to jump off things and I want to wrestle and I want and I think there's no one way of doing it with them. It's basically you're just playing keep, you're just trying to keep up, and like they have no shut off button. Like they're on the entire time. So you just have to be ready to run around, throw them up, swing them around, have fun. And then one of the things I find with my kids that I try to do that I really love, and I love the fact that I'm obviously sitting in my home gym, my garage gym, which
is beautiful, by the way. I think you've done a phenomenal job.
Thank you.
Bringing it to the space that it's in, from pre-COVID videos to the videos now. I know what it feels like to kind of line that up. If it's nice.
Stepped up. I've stepped up the garage gym, and it's my happy place. Part of it, why it's my happy place, because my kids view it as a playground. Like they come in here, to them, they get to work out with dad. So they'll come down here and I'm working out, and they'll jump off the squat rack. They love hanging from the pull-up bar. They, pull on the pulleys. Like they'll do workouts, and I'll, have my son like, okay, hey, take me through a workout. And he of his own, like without me prompting, he'll come up to me like, all right, you're programmed for the day, Dad. And he'll like start running me through, like, you're going to do this. Like he's done it at school, like stuff like that. It is just music to my ears, where it's like, oh, you're getting that love of movement. Like, I don't care if he ever works out, like, but he's enjoying moving. Like same thing with my daughter. She's following right along. And the third one, when she's up and able to run around, like the same, like this becomes a space where they're super comfortable and they can just run around and play. And yeah, that's the experience of trying to keep up with them and seeing their development and seeing what they do has definitely impacted like me and how I want to keep up my ability to move and my ability to keep track with them, because it's going to grow as they grow. Like
for sure.
Gets into sports, I want to be able to do that sport with them. Like so on and so, like it just, I never want to be lagging behind or worried about being able to do anything with them.
I share that with you to my core. Like my whole thing with movement, I think part of why I love this so much. I similarly to you, like it started at a very young age. I played sports, but I do remember being drawn towards the training hall, or also just being curious about, like, you see people, you see a different culture. This happened later in my life, but it's a worthy connection. When I was in Bali in 2017, I hiked this mountain called Mount Rinjani, and we have these porters who come with you, and they bring your tents and everything like that. So you basically do nothing, right? And they bring everything up. But their equipment is bare feet, and they have these like bamboo, they're, 2-ended carriers that they just sit on their shoulder, and they kind of do like a up and over every, I don't know, new peak that you get to, right? There's no rhyme or reason to it, but they're same balance. And then when they cook the lunch, they all sit in deep squats around whatever the fire is, and they make stuff. And they sit there to cook a meal for 15 hikers. It takes 25, 30 minutes. They don't move. They'll shift, they shift forward to season something. They shift back to reach something. And I remember sitting there and looking at this and being like, that's how we are supposed to be able to do what we do. And that's from on a geological time scale, we've been able to do that for a long time. And this is the first time that you're seeing in mass people not able to do that, unable to get into a baseline position, unable to get into just baseline hip flexion or something like that. And at the same time, you're seeing a rise in chronic pain across the board. And it's all fixable, but we're not pursuing it. And it's fascinating to me. I mean, when you walk around, if you take your kids out or something like that, do you just feel like a fly on the wall?
Oh yeah, I love. It was even before for my kids, when I was traveling a lot and kind of going from city to city, and in my prior role with Equinox, like I would spend a lot of time in airports. And one of the things that early in that experience, like, I mean, I went from maybe flying a couple times a year to go home or whatnot, to then I took on a role where I was, taking 20 flights a year. Like I was on all over the place, and I would find myself sitting in the airport, and I'd watch people, and it got to the point where I said to myself, like, I'll never get to a stage in my life where I'm going to try my best to never get to the stage in my life where like I'm the shuffler, like I'm just like taking 10 minutes to take 10 steps, and there's a lot of like, I don't want to oversimplify. Like there's a lot of things that can happen in somebody's life that can lead them to however they move and whatever they do. But if for anything that's within my power control and my locus of control, I want to maintain my ability to move as best I can, because it goes exactly to the example that you called out. Like we all had at some point in our life, outside of structural abnormalities or things that you're born with, we've all had some point in our life the ability to move in a variety of ways, postures and positions, and do so effortlessly without thought. Like I've reeled off, like my son and daughter can do it. Like it's something that we're inherently ingrained in. And then we meet our world where we start shrinking the need to do stuff like that, and shrinking the need to go into those different positions. And as the body functions, like it prunes what's not useful. And so if you're in an environment where the body's like, well, I never have to get into that position, so why should I retain the ability to do so? And either from a neurological perspective, where you're hard coding the movement pattern, or to a anatomical tissue-based perspective where you have the extensibility and the kinematics to actually get there. Either way, your body's like, no, we don't need it. I'm not going to waste my time, because we're in the end, in thinking about this, and I think this ties into the conversation here, in thinking about kind of coming on and talking with you. One of the questions you posed to me by email was like, okay, what books are you reading? And one of them is the book Exercise by Dr. Daniel Lieberman. And one of the things he covers off in there is, it's the first half of the book. I'm only through the first half, so the first half of the book really focuses on this. As a species, we're not designed to exercise. We're designed to move. We're designed to have movement and get around, but not to exercise to expend calories as we do in modern day, because we're designed to be as efficient with our calories and efficient with our energy expenditure, so we don't waste. And this is just, it's hardwired in us, from an evolutionary perspective, because we're not terribly different from what we were, thousands and thousands of years ago. And at that point in time, it was the literal feast or famine type of approach, where if you don't know when your next meal is going to come, like you don't spend time running on a treadmill, so to speak.
100%.
That's why the body takes the approach that it does. Like if it's not a useful tool to help you survive and procreate, then we don't need it. And it just happens to be that kind of ancient hardware and software is being applied to a modern environment that doesn't align to it.
And we're in, I mean, at this point in time, for the first time ever, we're in a state of significant abundance in many pockets of the world. So you have surpluses of calories in mass for everybody. And you have, at the same time, a significant decrease in the total caloric expenditure of an average human being that's just alive, awake. And those two things combine to create one of the potentially most unhealthy times that we've ever existed, because we're not going out to get our food, and we're not, I feel like there's a big group of kind of like primal thinking within the fitness industry. It's like a primal movement patterns and primal eating and all these things. And it stems from this these theories that, we are not further along in evolution than we are, but it feels like that because of technological advancements that are happening within our lifetime.
Yeah.
So you have a species that makes adaptations over millions of years, and we're making huge changes in what's available to us in hundreds of years. So we're not really caught up to that yet. And so if you're not living, I guess, closer to those primal elements, then you're putting yourself at potentially a disadvantage, and definitely a chronic pain, chronic lifestyle disadvantage over the long term.
Absolutely. And that's exactly it. And there's actually, I'll get to a point about kind of movement and caloric expenditure in a second, based on some of the research that Dr. Lieberman covers in his book, Exercise, as well as another book that I was reading prior to that. But one of the things to call out, like, yeah, our body, our system is designed for a specific type of environment. But as you just called out, because of technological advances, like, we are exponentially jumping ahead in terms of the environment that we're experiencing. And so our biology can't keep up with the environment. And where that leads is to things like, our body still functions as if we're in the savannah, and like, we have to have that cortisol response as a stress response to get away from the lion that's chasing us. But unfortunately, now that cortisol response is like me driving on the 405. I mean, like, well, why the hell aren't you people going faster? Like, there's no, like, don't worry about the person parked on the side of the street, just run. Like, but that I'm having the same type of stress response due to a psychological element, like me making that stress response for myself as is intended to happen because of an actual physical danger. Like, we're supposed to have these types of responses, and then it's supposed to toggle off. And now we're sitting in this nice low level chronic exposure to this stress, which leads to a lot of the diseases of lifestyle that we have today. But one of the things to note on, and it was an interesting point that he made in his book, a lot of research when it comes to how we move and our caloric expenditure, and looking back at primal times and what we are intended to do, go to a tribe in Africa called the Hadza, because they're one of the still remaining kind of hunter-gatherer tribes that are out there that are still kind of living as you would have thousands of years ago. And one of the things they noticed, like, their energy expenditure actually isn't terribly different from your average American's energy expenditure. Like, exercise and activity independent.
You just mean like from a metabolic like their
like total caloric expenditure, like,
gotcha, in like a day,
in a given day. Yeah. And so on average, we expend very similar amounts of energy. It's just how we use that energy and how we're allocating within our body, whether we're expending it and storing, or whether we're using it going on 10-mile walks to find food. We're in very similar. So it's less about like how much are we actually spending, because even if you work out a ton, your body eventually reaches it adjusts its expenditure to get back to your set point. So it's what are you taking in, and how is your body, how are you moving throughout the day to now utilize that energy and kind of show it. And that's where the benefit of exercise comes into play, and movement comes into play in general, where you're now kind of using it and shutting the calories you're taking in to different areas of your body and to different points of expenditure.
It reminds me of a point that I love that you, within the TRX curriculum, that you guys kind of hammered out as a foundational element, is this idea of like total stress on the body as a whole. So it's not just, when we think of stress, I imagine the average person is going to think of being frustrated at work, right? That's probably the most common stressful thing that people go through, is they have a deadline, they feel pressured to complete project X by deadline Y. That creates some sensation in their head, and that feeling we associate as stress. But stress from a physiological aspect is on our entire system. It's on from our brain to our bones to our body to our muscles, everything. And that is an evolutionary system. That is, to your point, things are behind us, we need to get away. Our body's going to produce a response to aid us in staying alive, because our sole function as a unit is to not die and then to make more of ourselves. And so we forget that if you are stressed because you're driving down the highway and you're pissed because the guy in front of you is going slow, that's the same response as I'm going to die. I need to stay alive on a very granular level.
Mhm.
And if you're not doing a good job of managing those stress factors from whatever areas of their life they present, from children to job to relationships, you can't live effectively and healthfully if you're constantly thinking that the lion's going to kill you.
Yeah. Well, and taking it a step further, it's acknowledging that stress is stress. Stress is neither good nor bad.
Mhm.
It's just it is, not to use the term to define itself, but it's a stress on the system. And so what I mean by that is, like, you can have the most positive thing in your life. Like, you can be, you have a kid. That's a super positive thing in your life. That's an extremely stressful part of your life. You can have a birthday party and you stay up later than you normally would. That's a stressor. They families in town, you haven't seen them in 2 years. Stressor. Like, no matter how positive and or seemingly negative the event or whatever is happening, the body just sees stress as stress, and it doesn't matter if it's coming from a physical stressor, a psychological stressor. It's how you manage that stress responses, which is going to kind of drive how you ultimately, the kind of a big piece of your health and how your body is able to manage going forward. And that's where we are, I think, with a lot of people, we've lost that ability to manage that stress response. And there's always this low current of stress that's constantly in the back, like, longer lines, slow traffic, like all these things. It's not the spike of like, oh shit, I got to run away from something. It's this constant hum of stress that's in the background. That's the killer.
And this goes full circle. I kind of love actually how this conversation is coming together, because it's easy to draw this conclusion too, that therein lies why play is so important. Because play, yes, it's wonderful from a movement perspective. And I think for those listening, when we talk about play, we don't mean going to the park and getting on the rosy, ring around the rosy or whatever. It's things like going into a 10 by 10 space and experimenting with what's your body capable of doing. Can you stand on one leg? Can you stand on 3 points of contact? Can you stand on 2 points of contact? What does it feel like to hold a push-up? Replicate things children are doing, because it's this state of play that has beneficial factors for your body and your mind, but it's also a step away from that constant flow of life being thrown at you, and stimulation, exposure to technology and light and sounds and noise and everything. And I feel like this is missed a lot, because you and I had a unique exposure at Equinox because of the demographic of clientele that would come into the facility, because of the price point, because of the environment that most of the buildings are in. You get high functioning kind of C-level people that are juggernauts in their own regard, and they're problem solvers. And a lot of their successes are due to the fact that they can be really efficient at figuring things out, meeting deadlines, and working through stress at light speed where other people may fall apart. Mm-hmm. And so their attempt then to remedy this kind of overall stress is to work harder and to do more in this training session, because it's, quote, the only hour I get to myself a day. Mm-hmm. How do we fix this?
I mean, yeah, that's a loaded question. It's a tough question, because part of it, I come back to the word play. Part of it is changing kind of a societal expectation or understanding of what play is. And like, there's this mindset like, oh, play's for kids. Like, no, it's not. Totally. Play's for everybody. Like, and by the way, that spinning around thing is called a merry-go-round.
I said Rosie. I was like, yeah. What am I? I'm thinking of the Pockets Full of Posies song, Ring Around the Rosy. Yeah.
Which is
Clearly don't have kids yet.
Yeah. Also, when you have kids, you start realizing a lot of the like nursery rhymes are really based in some bad things. Like Ring Around the Rosy is like, if I'm remembering correctly,
like cremation, right?
Yeah, it's like, like they use posies to cover the smell of cremation during the play. Like,
horrible thing to have children singing.
Yeah. So not to get in that side tangent, but coming back to play, I think it's redefining the value of play and what play is, and how that plays into how that works into somebody's overall physical wellness and well-being. I think part of it's also understanding how the management of stress was like, to especially those types of clientele and people that are living a super high work stress lifestyle, understanding what it means to then come in to train and or play and or alleviate that stress in some way, because like you said, they're trying to spend that 60 minutes to themselves and focus on themselves, helping them redefine what that looks like. But then also looking at, and it's a long-term approach. It's not like I'm throwing out ideas as if it's simple, but it absolutely not. It's looking at the rest of their life and seeing like, well, where else can you interject some unstructured time and play and exploration in any capacity? And that could be, going for a hike. That could be play for somebody, because then you're inevitably going to be bouncing from rock to rock or looking around or in nature, and you're taking a breath. You're away from self-service potentially, so that they get to, how do you engineer your environment to reinforce a playful experience, even if it's not traditional play, as it were. So I think that becomes now a question of how do you build that value for that individual, and how do you engage them in seeing like the potential that can bring to them. What came to mind when you were talking about like the type of clients that we've had, I remember back to a client that I worked with, that he started off with traditional goals, and he was exactly the kind of the clientele that you described, and he wanted to come in and he wanted to get stronger and focus on improving his body. But what he ended up getting into was like, we had beams that went through the group fitness room that you could jump up and grab, and he started doing like monkey crawls with his hands, like brachiation, going from one hand to the next, like just down the beams. And that was it became part of his program. And we started interjecting play in that respect, because once he did, he's like, oh wow, that was pretty fun, I can do that. And now that led to the next level. Oh, what else can I do? And now what else can I do? And this led this guy to the point where he installed like a salmon ladder in his backyard and started playing around, like doing stuff like that. To me, where it comes back to going to your original question, like how do we re-engineer what people look at when it comes to play and training and how they take care of their bodies? One, it's how do we instill the value of movement variability and play and exploration, not at the detriment of specificity as well. It's a balance. Like, yes, it's not everything all over the place and never being specific, but it's also not just locking yourself into one area. You got to make it fit, unless you have a specific goal or outcome. Like if you're a power lifter, lock yourself into that one area. Yes. But you still need a little bit of variability to keep that ability to move, but you have a point of focus. But if you're a general fitness clientele, you have a variety, you have some specifics, then change it, have some specifics, then change it. And it's that toggling. So you redesign what that looks like for them in terms of a training capacity. You build value for them as to why some unstructured play and defining that, helping them to find that for themselves would look like. And then you give them a win. And that to me is what was, for like that particular client that I'm referencing, that was one of the biggest differentiators for him. He got the win and he's like, oh, this is cool. Now what else can I do? And it's that success begets success mentality of, oh, I did this. Now let me try this. Now let me try it. And that's what is movement exploration. That's what a kid does. Like, oh, I jumped off that step. I wonder if I jump off a step higher. Like that's what my son does. Like I pick him up from school and he's like, I'm going to jump off there, but hold on to my hand. Oh, I did it with you. Hold on to my hand. I'm going to try it without you. Hold on to my hand. I had to happen this past Friday where I just spent 15 minutes outside in front of school. Like, you went from holding two hands to one hand to no hands. And he's like, it's like, oh, I got to win. Now let me get another win. Let me get another win. Let me see what else I can do. And it cascades from there.
It's crazy how it's like positive reinforcement through movement. It's really, I find these even at this point in my life and career of training, going on now 15 years, when you understand a new movement or when you feel something different or when you explore something that you hadn't before, and I mean this in a training sense, but this could be anything in life as well. There is a childlike enjoyment to finding that you can do something different. And I feel like neurologically, I would love to have like a neuroscientist on here to talk about what's going on in your brain. Like when that happens, do you actually resort back to these childhood feelings of development and cognition where you're accomplishing something and then hardwiring that into, because your kid now knows how to jump without any hands. Mm-hmm. He won't wake up tomorrow and go, I think I need two hands back. you cross a line when you do that. And that can happen in fitness and in training and movement as well. When you learn how to do, a get up for the first time, and you connect the points from lying on your back, coming up and making it all the way to standing and going back down, even though it's unweighted, it's like, whoa, I did that as an adult, as an office worker, as a parent, or whatever. And there's so much positivity that comes from that. I think it really impacts that stress response, right?
Yeah.
It's one mark on the good side for
Yeah.
you.
It's getting, basically what you're describing is this, you can refer to as like the Goldilocks effect or kind of desirable difficulty. It's setting the challenge to where it's not too little, not too much, just right. So that way there is a challenge, you are going up against something. So that way when you do it, there's a sense of accomplishment, but it's not so easy that like, oh yeah, of course I did that. And it's not so hard that you're thinking to yourself, well, there's no way I can ever do that. It'd be the wall my son was jumping off was like 3 feet high or something like that. If I took him to a 10-foot high wall, I've overshot the challenge. Like there's no amount of hands are going to make him feel comfortable doing that at this point. But if it's the 6-inch step, like he's been doing that for a while, that's not going to give him a sense of accomplishment. That 3-foot wall is right at his edge of ability to where he's like, can I or can't I? And I'll go back to like using it as an example. And I think we see this within our clients. Once he does it one time, he knows he can do it. Doesn't mean he's going to do it again. The next time we go there, he may take one hand to start with to regain that confidence. And then he goes to the no hands. You just reset your set point of where you're starting from. And so now you can start from a little bit more progressive of a phase to where it's a shorter distance to get to that end outcome. And I think we can see that with clients and movement in general and training. Like you get them to experience it, you expose their body physically, neurologically to that movement. You've given them an understanding. They come back. You have to set them up a little bit less than you did the first time, but you set them up a little bit and they experience it. Right. And each time you progressively set them up less and less to the point where now it's hardwired. It's through, that's where it comes back to that discussion of variability versus specificity. Right. In order for us to learn to do something, it does need that element of repetition. Like one of the most complex things that we all do and take for granted is walking. Like we're literally just going from one foot to the next in single leg stance. And none of us, a good portion of us, again, outside of people that don't have that ability, like you don't put a second thought to it, but you don't consider like, oh, that was a good year to year and a half of your life that you went from, that you tried to figure out how to get to that point where you're upright and walk around, and you're still not good at it. You're just now you're able to at least be vertical and totter around. And now you got to refine it and get to the point where now, it's second nature. But it came through trial and error and getting a little bit more and a little bit more and reinforcing that pattern. And I think we can do that with a lot of what we do. That's where movement exploration comes into play. You explore. Oh, that was cool. Let me do that a bunch. And I'm going to do that a little bit more and a little bit more and a little more. Now I'm really good at that. Okay, now explore. I'm going to do this a bunch. And that's where, like with training for myself, I'll come down here and I'll, play around with a mace or a club or anything. And like, let me just figure out what I'm doing. And then I something ticks and like, oh, I'm going to do that a little bit more. Let me see how I can tweak it and stress it differently. And I think that's in the training realm where play can come into effect. Like you pick something, you give it a try, and not, I'd say the psychological side of it, not being afraid to fail is the other piece of it. Not being afraid to make yourself look like an idiot. Like, when I first started working with Indian clubs, like I'd smack myself in the back of the head of them all the time. Like, I just not being afraid to like, I'm going to look like a dummy, and so be it. And I'll just keep going.
And that's, man, there's so many things I want to talk about. But it's interesting hearing you talk about this play idea again. I think from a coaching perspective, one of the hardest things, and I think something that new coaches struggle with the most, is how do you pick the starting point for your client once you've assessed them, right? You take someone in, they saw a video on Instagram of someone deadlifting 9 billion pounds. And so they come to you and say, hey, I want to do this. You put them through an assessment. And based on the assessment, you as the coach, that's your job, need to decide where on the spectrum of movement proficiency is this person. how do we start there? And then what's the low hanging fruit to progress them towards their current perceived goal, which may change. They may decide, they don't want to do that anymore, and that's up to them to choose. But our job is to get them there as safely as possible. And with exposure to social media and all the different products that are out there and the modalities that are out there and this person doing that, you're always comparing yourself to someone else's endpoint, and you're not getting to see the journey because no one wants to show it. No one will watch it, right? So it won't get traction and it won't show. And I remember Michelle Dalcourt did a workshop with us, and he was talking about these work-in days. So like you have workout days, which everyone thinks about, or you go and you put it all on the line and you train hard and you stick to your program. But then these other days, these work-in days are like these days of exploration, these days of, okay, you walk up to the wall and there's an Indian mace and you grab it off, but you don't have a program. You don't have a goal in mind. Let's just feel this. What does it do when I put it over my head? Those, I almost think at this point in my life, those are the most valuable moments. Like if I'm training jujitsu, I learn more when my eyes are closed. In a sport that involves gripping and reaching and grabbing and holding, I walk away from days of training with my eyes closed like I felt like I've trained for weeks, because you get all these feedback mechanisms when you're not so focused on trying to choke someone or looking someone in the eyes when they're angry at you. You just eliminate that, and you're able to explore with just kind of, what is your body doing right now? And I don't think we're asking ourselves that enough in this space where we're constantly overloaded by what other people are doing. When you're working with, I guess it could be a client or maybe even a new business venture, or you're coming into something, what are some of like your parameters for electing a starting point for someone or figuring out where to begin, I would say?
Well, I mean, looking at working with a client, you have to start with that intake, that needs analysis on their end. Knowing where to begin with them in terms of any type of training means you need to know where they're at to begin with. What's their point A if you want to take them to point Z. And so part of that is looking at how they move. Like with it, and you're hitting the nail on the head. Like a lot of people predominantly just focus on the end outcome of what they want to do. Like they want to lift that weight, or but they don't think about the process to get there. And so for me, I take it back to the beginning. And so I use FMS as my primary, from a movement standpoint, my primary movement screening tool to look at, okay, without load, without stress, in supported and unsupported environments, how does your body move? How does it respond to these challenges? And then I just take you up and I take you through a variety of patterns and I see how your body's responding. But then I look at your history and what you're bringing to the table, kind of the miles that are on your engine, so to speak. Like what do I have to work against? Like what environments do you exist in? What do you do on a daily basis? And from there, once I have that information, knowing the progression points to get to something like a deadlift or other different movements, that's the easy part. Like, I know how to take somebody. I know how to progress somebody from standing to a barbell deadlift. Like I know those progression points. And so based on the information I collect in that assessment and that screening and just spending time with that individual, I make my best guess. And I always err on the side of being conservative for a couple of reasons, but I make my best guess based on the information I have, I'm going to start you at this level. You've never trained before, you have decent mobility, but limited stability, and you had an injury like this X number of years ago. This puts you at a lower end on the spectrum. Oh, you've trained, you have a good amount of baseline movement, I'm going to start you at this end of it. And you start bucketing like where you put people on the movement spectrum. You can do it for any movement, any of the base training patterns that somebody's going to start with, and then you progress from there. I called out starting conservatively because I start conservatively for two reasons. One, my number one goal working with any client, working with anybody in general, is safety. Like I want to make sure I'm putting you in a position of not potentially getting injured. I want to make sure it's a safe experience. That sets up for you to have a good experience just psychologically, because if you feel safe and confident, that means you can express your best self. But the second piece of starting conservatively, and this isn't necessarily like sandbag it, so to speak, but if I start you at an easier point per se, so say maybe you can start at 3, but I start you at 2, you get a win early on by accomplishing and just owning 2. And then now that's bolstered your confidence even more. So not only are you feeling safe, you're like, oh, I'm safe, just, consciously or unconsciously, I know I'm not under threat. I've got a win, I can progress on. That becomes a positive feedback loop for you. Like, okay, now what can I do next? Now where's my next step? Now where else can I go? And that pays dividends in the end of confidence and ability. Because if you start somebody too high, and now you have to take them a step down, you've knocked their ego, you potentially put them in a position to get hurt or not feel comfortable at least. And now you're having to reverse engineer back to a lower point and then get them back to the point where you tried starting them at. That becomes that's a negative experience. I want that net positive. And so that kind of going back to your original question, how do I figure out where to start? And this process can apply to anything I'm doing, whether it's working with a client, working with starting a new role, starting a new project, whatever the case may be. I want to assess like, okay, well, where are we at now? Where do we want to go? And what's the appropriate starting point for us to get going? Like, because if I know your point, again, if I go back to, if I know your point A, I know the steps you need to take to get to point Z. But if I never figure out point A, then I'm guessing.
This might be one of the most valuable things that I learned from you early on, just from workshops. And I think it paid dividends in developing a safe client business, and something that I think about these principles on a weekly basis with current clients and just in general in other aspects of my life, oddly enough, because you're not sandbagging your client by starting them. Look, every single person could walk in and go get under a barbell, and they could squat, maybe 65 to 95 pounds. Probably every person that gets a gym membership could do that. But that's not what we're coaching. It's where are they going to be in a month? And if they do that now, they won't get a month. They'll get regressions, and they'll get failure and frustration, and they'll get losses. So when you start your client, or let's say you want to play guitar, right? Just learn how to hold the guitar.
Yeah.
Even if you know how to play a song, learn how to hold the guitar first. And by doing this, it is this positive reinforcement. When you're working with a client, or when you're with your client, it's a special thing to be part of that, to watch them progress as an individual. And even if some of those progressions were available to them anyway, but they didn't know it, they weren't available because they weren't doing them. So when you develop that proficiency, it really does change the trajectory of their training, but it gives you credibility and authority as the coach, because you're demonstrating safe movement and they're moving through it. And so it feels empowering to be able to do that, because a lot of these clients are not coming at this from a place of movement proficiency or previous weightlifting history. This is their day one. And so if they're day one, if you're just learning how to drive and you get put on a NASCAR track and you crash, you're never going to want to drive again, ever.
Yeah.
And it's crazy how powerful that can be. The small wins. Small wins are so valuable in the 100%. Beginning.
Yeah. The more you can set up that consistent, like just microdosing of win after win, because that's what inevitably turns it into a consistent part of your life. That's right. What keeps you going time after time. It's one thing to get that huge phenomenal win, like the big drop in the bucket, but if it never happens again, does that still consistently become part of your day-to-day experience? Versus if you're getting that drip feed of, oh, you did a little bit better, you're doing a little better, it just ties into our psychology of, I want mastery, so I want to keep getting better, I want to see myself improving over time. Like that's part of what we want to do. Like if we stop seeing ourselves improve, we hit a brick wall, then you basically start losing interest. You start going a different direction, and you change course, and that may be for the better or for the worse. But our ability as trainers and working with clients and anything we do is by setting people up in that right starting point, we set them up to have that consistent exposure over time, to learn appropriately, to be confident in what they can do. And then it just takes them on for years. Like you can continue on and explore and do different things. within the same pattern, with the same style of training, with the same tool or implement, or going to a variety of things. Like that's where you're trying to open up the window in the world to them to
Right.
have that confidence of now I can do whatever I want.
When you're like taking in a new client, or if you're working with someone, you're working with athlete, or if you're on the board or you're doing a presentation, right now in the fitness industry, I feel like there's like two seats at the table. And one seat is that assessments and functional movement is crap, and it's just smoke and mirrors and marketing. And then on the other side of it is this, it's the be all end all. You must adhere exactly to whatever the assessment protocols are, and then work backwards on movement correction to arrive at a very safe, long program for the client. When you're working with someone or a group, what kind of movements do you let slide, and what kind of deviations do you allow for? Because I think of you as a mover as like a black belt in movement, right? Like your patterns, the way that you hinge, press, curl, pull, like everything, it is the textbook version of how I feel like that should be expressed. And we also know on the same side of that spectrum, on like elite performance and elite movement, if you look at athletes, sometimes their deviation is why they're so wonderful, right?
Right.
Like this is ever true in Olympic weightlifting. You have people setting records with non-textbook lifts because perhaps their limb length or their habits are weird, and it just allows them to express themselves the best as an individual. So what is in your kind of hierarchy of like the must-haves and the, hey, this is okay, like this foot being here, or this isn't 100% risky? What are some of those for you that you consider?
To me, I think it's less about the specifics of like calling out specific things that I'll let slide, and it's more the environment in which they take place. So to me, it more boils down to what is the challenge they're coming up against, and if they don't do it perfectly, are they still in a position to be able to safely come out of it? Like, can they control what they're doing? And so you can look at things like, are they working with a maximal load or close to maximal load? Or are they working with a truly sub-maximal load? If they're working with a truly sub-maximal load, something that they can control, if they're not 100% perfect, I'm less concerned in that environment because they have more ability to escape and get out and allow those adjustments to take place to keep them in a safe environment. But if they've maximally loaded themselves, so if they're pulling 3 wheels off the floor, I don't really want to see a ton of deviation out of what's ideal for their body. And so that's where it's also inherent into that dichotomy that you express, like the camp that's like, oh, assessments and screens, they're all crap, and you do nothing but screen to start with. The inherent in that is making sure that you're finding what's ideal for that individual, and where when they're set up in a position to lift, you're doing it. And what I would argue is both camps are doing the same thing. It's just the camp that thinks they're not assessing and screening are just probably experienced enough coaches that they're just doing it already and they don't know that they're doing it.
Right.
Because when you often hear them talk about, well, I don't screen, but I can just see them and I do these, I go in my head and I look at, and you just told me you have a screen. Like the whole point is to have a screening process. Like it doesn't matter if you use something like FMS or something else, like have a process that you repeatedly do to have checks and balances against, because no high level coach is going out there and like, I just feel like having you do this today and let's see what happens. Like, and so coming back to the original question, like, how do I decide like where to give and take? It's that environment that I'm putting them in. Like, can they manage the load? Is it submax? That's often what I'm defaulting to. It also is who that person is and what they're dealing with. Like, have I found how new in the training relationship is it? How do I know how they move? What's their history? In certain patterns, I may have more leniency, but if they have a history of low back pain and there are certain triggers, there may be less leniency there. I want them to be confident in the move, because if I trigger a painful response, that's going to send a reminder to their body like, oh, we can't do this. Right. So there's a lot of different kind of nuanced factors that go into it, but at least one of the most objective things I can call out is what type of stress am I putting them under, and can they manage that? Because like you called out, like you train jujitsu, you get into a lot of varied positions there that from biomechanics standpoint, like you can call out that are not
Horrible.
ideal.
Oh, they're bad. I was telling my client the other day, I was like, this sport, man, I love it, but it is bad for you.
Yeah.
It is
But
bad.
And I trained jujitsu for a while as well. And knowing the positions you get put in and how you're like, it's not done for health. Like you're especially if you're training hard,
Yep.
you're putting a lot of stress on your body. But B, if you're just doing light sparring, like it's easier on the body. That sub-max load, and you can get into different positions without the worry of stress and strain. But if you're going hard and you're sparring, all out, that may be putting a lot more stress on your body. And that's where you start running up against your end ranges. And that's where you start feeling like, oh, that wasn't good to get in that position because my body couldn't control it and couldn't come out of it. And I got butted up against my barriers and my body didn't like that. That's where I look at those submax versus max load elements. Like how much of a buffer zone do you still have? And if you're bashing into that wall, then you may be coming out the other side with an injury or an issue.
I always thought it was fascinating when I would see, I can only speak to my experience of being within Equinox, where I would see pushback on doing things like the assessment. And I'm admittedly like very on board. I'm actually blocking my door so my cat won't get in with an FMS kit. So like I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, so I might not be the best person here. But what I would see is even if FMS isn't the 100% correct be all end all, which it's not, it is a useful tool to expose the story of who the person is. And when you do it, if you do it consistent, like in a repeatable way, you just get to see, and I will tell clients this, that we're just going to see what your body says because it can't talk, right? So when you go through a squat pattern, okay, your foot turns out here. Your foot also turns out in an inline lunge. It also turns out in a hurdle step. Okay, we're pretty certain that there's some sort of external rotation here that we should just note, right? Be mindful of it. And now when we go and do other things and load it, it's not that we're going to spend 45 minutes to an hour just working on like your ankle mobility. We're going to prime it as best we can, increase the range of motion, load it, test it, and then do it again. And hopefully over time it gets better. Why would you forego that opportunity to build trust with someone and expose whatever their body is not saying to see and then start? When you left Equinox, did you keep the FMS as kind of your go-to screen foundation? And what else did you add, or what did you take away from that when you began doing things 100% kind of on your own protocol?
So the short answer is yes. I have my FMS kits right there. I still use that with clients. That is still my go-to screening protocol. And the only thing I do additionally now is, because now I have more kind of flexibility in the amount of time that I have, is I'll do the screen as their baseline, and then I'll take them through some baseline, just sub-maximally loaded fundamental lifts to see how they respond. And I pick the ones to do with them based on the history of what they've presented to me, their experience, injury history. I take their background into account to decide what I want to do with them and what I don't want to. But because I have the luxury of more time, I can spend more time watching them move now from a body weight, non-intensity stress environment to a little bit more of a stress environment. How does load change their mechanics? Going back to the point of what you're talking about, I anchor to two things. One, FMS isn't the end all be all of assessment. And the best thing I know about, the best way I can tell that it's a good assessment, and that's the case, is because the founders of FMS will be the first to tell you that it's not the end all be all of assessment. They'll be the first to say it's a piece of the puzzle, but you have to take this other information in. And so that's point number one. If the people that are setting the principles are acknowledging that, then I like that aspect of it, because I know they're not trying to sell me on something. They're just trying to give me a good tool to use. Two, I take a quote that I learned from Charlie Weingroff a long time ago, where basically what we're doing with taking somebody through the screen is trying to find the patterns that I can confidently assume that they'll be able to accept the stress of training. That's what I'm trying to do. can I put them in a position to be able to accept the stress of training? If you show me you can't do a body weight, it's not logical for me to assume you're going to be able to accept a barbell on your shoulders or overhead or what have you. Like it just is just a matter. And this is where it comes back to, like, it doesn't matter what screening tool you use. I like FMS because it's systematic and it's objective and I can go through it and it's simple. But whatever you end up going with, just have it come out the other end of you being able to decide, are they ready for this or not? Because it's something we naturally do anyways within training. If somebody comes and says, I want to learn a power clean, you don't just throw them into the power clean. You make sure, okay, can you hinge? Can you squat?
Right.
Now, can you pick up that barbell? Can you front squat a barbell? Now, can you do a high pull? Like for fundamental exercises, for things that people want to accomplish from a training perspective, we naturally do that. But going below that baseline exercise to now fundamental patterns and rebuilding that suddenly that becomes too much. Like, no,
Right.
like if they don't have hip mobility, then they're likely not in a position where they can do these full-on patterns. They're not going to respond well to that stress of training. So now let's take them a step lower, build that base, and then rebuild them back up. And again, it's not saying that we got to get them perfect. It's just, can you, and that's why, within FMS, just anchoring back to that, that's why the baseline is a 2. It's not,
Right.
we're not looking for you to get 3. We're not looking for you to be perfect and Gumby. It's, do you have a baseline ability to move without major restriction or limitation? Because if you're a 1, that means you're pretty rough in terms of what you're trying to do. Like, you can't get into the position just hands down, or your movement is so bad that you're egregiously out of it. That just, to me, is like a simple, like, okay, well then I shouldn't load that pattern.
Right.
Is it? And it's also calling out, like, there's often, especially within the fitness industry, an all or nothing mindset around things, where it's like, oh, well, if I can't do it now, I'll never be able to do it. Like, no, man, you just don't do it now, so we can build you back up to do it in a short order. Like, I want you to do everything, like going back to play, I want you to do everything that you want to do, just no sooner than you should. Like, let's build it back up.
There's one thing I'd love to get to here in a second, but before we do, I'd just like to hear your perspective on this, because I think about, like, just movement a lot, and I've thought about movement more and more the more things that I've done in my life. And when I was introduced to a gym, it's kind of funny because you see a lot of partial lifts, right? Like, so you see people will do a deadlift or they'll do a front squat, and they kind of do them as if that is the end goal. When I think of the spectrum of movement, right, where you go from, we'll say, lying on your back, rolling around as the starting point, to, I see this split into 2 different kind of end points. And one of them is running and jumping and bounding. So if you get from your back up to standing, you begin to walk, you start to lean forward more, you start to run, then you bound and you jump. That's kind of like the best expression of walking, is a big, long, high jump variation. Yeah. And then on the strength side of it, I see the furthest expression of strength training as the clean and jerk. From a mobility standpoint, maybe the snatch more so, but all things coming together from, like, knee dominance, ankle mobility, hip dominance, power, stability, overhead mechanics. Where do you see the greatest expressions of movement along this spectrum? And feel free to change that or unpack it in any way.
I mean, it's an interesting question. Like, I see the greatest expression. There's a lot of different areas. And I'm trying to think the best way to get to it. Like, what just jumped to mind, and like the greatest expression of movement. And I am in no way, shape, or form a dancer of any ilk, and my wife will be the first to attest to that. But I think dance in a variety of formats is one of the best expressions of movement, because you're getting in a variety of patterns, and that involves, plyometric, leaping, bounding, jumping in a multi-directionally, not just straight ahead. Now you're doing it to the side, you're turning in the air, but you're also doing it to rhythm and with intent. And to me, that becomes one of the best expressions of movement that I can see is, I wish I could dance well, but the way I'm always trying, it always looks like I'm trying to box somebody when I dance. I'm not there. I don't have that in me, but not to have a fixed mindset around it. But I think to me, that's one of the best expressions of movement because of those additional elements that you get into. Not only are you getting into a variety of patterns, and there's a tremendous amount of intensity that can be done there, but there's additional layers of, like I said, the rhythm and the feel of it. And then the intent that, oftentimes when you dance, if you're a professional dancer, you're trying to convey a message through your movement. That is often what dance was originated. It was to convey a message through movement. And I think that's a big piece of it. So to me, that's one of the ultimate expressions of movement. Because
do you dance in your gym when you're all alone ever?
Oh yeah, I move around. I make myself look like an idiot all the time.
I do too sometimes. So we have this, and then I want to hear your second part of the question. But we have this it's kind of a glass door where neighbors, if they walk by and look in, could see. Sometimes you're training and you just feel good and you have music, and I'll start just like dancing. It's probably more for like a movement exploration thing than actually thinking I know what I'm doing. But I'll catch myself and be like, man, if ever I wanted the neighbors to just think that I had lost my mind, it would be for them to walk by in the middle of the day and see this person just prancing around their garage gym in the middle of the day. Like,
yep.
An idiot.
Yeah. If I open up my garage, people are like, my neighbors, I think my neighbors are used to seeing me just doing random things in here. They're good with it now.
So what about on the strength side of it?
On the strength side, it's an interesting question. I think because you're trying to capture something that covers a lot of capacities and a lot of outputs. I'm torn. Part of me wants to say something like the Turkish get-up because it takes you through a variety of positions and postures. You're going from ground to standing. You can load it super heavy and really express a tremendous amount of strength, which you're probably leaving on the table as an expression of like speed or power, but you could still go fast, like doing a body weight. So to me, I think I default to something like the Turkish get-up because there's so much in there to where if you're lacking in one area, it can really limit your ability to express yourself to the full extent. So doing a get-up with 100 pounds, you got to really have a lot of the capabilities needed to get there. Besides that, I'd probably say taking something from ground to overhead because that's the biggest like naturally range of movement. So it's like a snatch of some kind where you're taking without any support or additional assistance, you're taking a heavy load and just getting it overhead where that's the furthest we can just naturally let our limbs travel without leaving the ground, basically.
So let's nerd out for a second here and dig a little deeper. Let's say that you have two individuals and you're selecting them to be on your island of survival. And I'm not making this up as I go, so bear with me. And let's use strength relative to body weight ratio because I feel like that's a valuable one. So let's say that both of these individuals, actually, the more I say this out loud, they're more ridiculous. I notice that it's going to become, but let's say that one of them can snatch, I'm going to change it. One of them can clean and jerk 2 times their body weight. And then one of them can do a get up with their body weight. So single, I was originally not accounting for the fact that the get ups performed with a single arm, which would have put an insane stress on the body at 1.5 times your body weight. So let's say Turkish get up with your body weight or clean and jerk double your body weight. Which individual would you like to have on your island and why?
The get up, because the island inherently implies a level of unpredictability and variability in the environments and situations we can get in or where we're going to need to get in. And so I'd rather somebody that can confidently get on their back and without any additional support and potentially with a significant amount of load, go to standing and do so with confidence and ability versus somebody that just has the ability to move heavy weight fast overhead. And I don't want to simplify the snatch piece of it, but if we're on this magical island of trying to, I need to get a log off the ground.
Right.
That person that can do the get up can get their shoulder underneath, and now they're wedging themselves under. They can prop it up. Now I can get there, help them get it. They've exposed themselves to a more variety of movement and positions versus the snatch. You're going through a
clean and jerk, but
clean and
all
jerk.
the same, yes.
But you're going through a very consistent position.
Right. Now, so I think about this question quite a bit myself, because I try to weigh out, like, what do I want my programming to be? You know, what percentage of kettlebell movements do I want in there? What percentage of barbell movements? I enjoy the Olympic lifts, so part of it goes back to the play thing. Like I like having them in my program from just a technical and enjoyment standpoint. But what I've found in my own training, and I don't know if this would be true to individual acts that we're talking about, but I think it's interesting to consider. And it's also important to say that I didn't clarify this in the original question, so it wouldn't really make sense, because we are purposely trying to separate the two. But I would think that an individual that could clean and jerk double their body weight would also just be able to do a get up with their body weight. And as someone who could do a get up with their body weight would be limited in technical ability to be able to then do a clean and jerk with double their body weight. Mm-hmm. And for that reason, I almost lean more towards the clean and jerker, because I feel like, yes, it's more total weight move quickly, but it's the prerequisites necessary from like a mechanics standpoint to execute the movement safely. No, does that change that at all for you?
It doesn't, because inherent to the way you teed up the second part of the question is the technical ability to do the snatch, which
clean and jerk.
All right, clean. Sorry,
yes, yeah.
Clean and jerk. But technical ability to do the clean and jerk. So the limiting factor is technique. Yes. The question I have is, what is the transferability of that technique to the environment you now find yourself in, of this magical island, where it's not technique oriented. You're in a variable space. Right. So you have your specific technique to do the clean and jerk, got it right that time, specific technique to do the clean and jerk. And then you have a variable environment where that specific technique may not apply. So you have the raw power and strength to do it. So I agree with the premise of, if somebody can do double body weight clean and jerk, they're probably well put together. They got a significant amount of strength. They have a significant amount of power. But, and I'll take this from an experience that I had with a trainer we were working with at one point in time. He focused on powerlifting, and he made the comment like, "Oh man, if it's not squat, bench, or deadlift, right, I'm pretty out of my depth." And to watch him move body weight in some pretty fundamental, like, dynamic mobility and dynamic, prep patterns, was like watching the Tin Man move. Like that, it sticks in my head. Is like, if I'm technically proficient to the point where I built myself up to be able to do double body weight clean and jerk, have I locked myself in? These are all hypotheticals now. Right. Have I locked myself into a more limited, scope of training to where my ability to deal with a variety of inputs and a variety of movement stressors has now been robbed from? That's right. That's kind of where my mindset goes to, because to your call out, like, the technical ability is one of the key elements of being able to do the clean and jerk at that load. Right. So that's where I still stick with the person that does the Turkish get up, because they're now used to being in a more varied position. They can be on their back, they can be in the half kneeling position, they can be in that tripod position in an awkward side bend with a significant amount of load overhead. Like, their body has gone to the different ranges and has been able to adapt. I want more adaptability than specificity in that range. And so is part of the answer largely dependent on this hypothetical environment? So if the environment changed, let's say to not be on this island, but instead to be in Los Angeles, and maybe you're not selecting this person for the apocalypse team, but instead you're just looking for, like, who do you want on your team, just in general, for a variety of recreational sports, maybe swimming and being on the beach, whatever. Who is the more capable person? And I get stuck. I don't know. But I think inherent, like, and this is the through line and the important piece of the question that ties into program design and how to work with clients, is the aspect of, like, well, for whom and for what? Like, what's the environment and what's the challenge that you're like, everything changes. Like if you change that from the mythical island where we're trying to survive to now we're on the football field. Okay, I'll go with the clean and jerk guy.
Right. Yeah. 100%.
Like,
so I guess this brings me to this thing. Well, first note is that I love that. And maybe that's the part that's overlooked quite a bit in programming. That is the specificity. The island does matter. The choice of what you should choose does matter based on the factors that you're looking to accomplish. And the island presents a different set of demands than the football field does.
Yeah.
So now I guess it's worth addressing the stupidest question that we all hear as coaches: what's the most valuable exercise of all time? And here's where I get stuck is I know that you can, and I've answered personally Turkish get up a lot of times to this question when I'm asked. That changed while I was training for Olympic lifting, because I saw how much like mobility and movement proficiency actually went into these expressions at the higher percentages in the clean and jerk and the snatch. But I read this quote. I think it was in Tim Ferriss's. You read Tools of Titans?
I have not read that. No.
And it's basically saying like you have an endurance runner and you have a power lifter or a power lifter, and there's a fire in the building and you have to get up to the top floor, and what you have is too heavy, and so you have to choose one person to get up there with you as quick as you can. Who do you choose? And I think it might have been Mark Bell or someone like that was like, I choose the power lifter 100 times over because they're just strong enough to accomplish the job. And I think about that and I'm like, but there's a lot of factors playing in here, right? Your cardiovascular endurance, your ability to repeat the action over and over to get up all the stairs to finally make it to the top. What is the most valuable exercise? What is the most valuable movement that we can do? And kind of my version of the question is, how do we get away from thinking like that? How do we get people to start thinking of what's the lowest hanging fruit for me to move better, period, to even have the opportunity to get to those things in the future?
Yeah, I think that's more where I go to, because I was trying to think, okay, well, how would I answer that? What's like the most valuable exercise you could do? And the general statement that came to mind was like, well, the hardest one you can do well. That's the most valuable exercise for you.
I love that. That's perfect.
So, and I steal that line from not necessarily in response to this question, but just in general from Dr. Craig Levinson. Like he's like, that's one of the things he's like, what's the hardest thing you can do well? That's the one of the best exercise, and that can apply to any different type of exercise. So it's almost a non-answer. But I do agree with the point that you make. Like, it's stepping away from that, because I could also make the argument like, oh, being able to go for a walk and sustained pace for a long period of time, like that's probably one of the best things you can do. Or can you get up at least a decent jog and get some speed and some miles underneath you without breaking down? Because to that hypothetical question, I get to carry a heavy thing up a flight of stairs. Yeah, the person may be super strong, but can they make it to the top of the stairs before they gas out? Like what kind of engine do they have that's supporting that strength? Because I've there's that offhand person's offhand slogan from the person that just does heavy lifting is like, 10 reps is cardio for me. Like but that's somebody that, well, I don't know that I want that person help me carry it up, because after flight 1, they got to take a 10-minute break to catch their breath. So I think, to me, it comes back to how do you develop all the capacities that you need to meet the challenge in the environment? And that's what fitness is. Like, I guess coming back to it, fitness is being fit enough to accomplish the challenge at hand, being able to meet the demands of what you need to do. So it goes back to the hypothetical question. Like, if you're on an island, your demands are different than if you're on a football field, or you just happen to be somebody that lives in a city and trying to get to and from work and have a good day.
Yeah, I think we just dress it up, right? We give ourselves cool toys and racks and things and mobility tools and all this stuff. And at the end of the day, like what all of this stuff, and the industry has a nice price tag. I'll say that. There's a lot of money to be made in fitness because there's a ton of people that are exposed to it now, and people want to solve problems. And we have a generation of people that are in pain. So we want to get away from that. fitness industry is a great place to do that. And it is easy to forget that the goal here is to be able to move better and more efficiently so that you can meet the demands of your environment. I think this question, the other one that pops into my head all the time when I think of this is when people, and I know because you're a coach, people text you, they go, what supplements should I be taking? And I always say, what's your blood work? Well, first I say, one, I don't know. I'm not a doctor, right? I'm not a physician. I'm not really in a place to tell you. And the other thing is, what's your blood panel look like? Like, what are your intake factors? Because the answer is nothing until you know that. You know?
Yeah, I'd also ask, like, well, why do you think you need to take supplements? Like,
right. How's your sleep? Do you move?
What supplements should I take? What? Talk to me about your diet. Like, what are you eating? What did you have for breakfast this morning? Like there's a whole, and that's exactly it. Like there's this idea of like, biohacking and trying to get to the end goal as fast as possible. But the reality is like you have to putting in the work. It's the process of getting there. And if you don't have the fundamentals down, like supplements have the name supplements because they're meant to be supplemental, like inherent.
I literally put the definition in a post the other day because I was like, it is to add to things that are already performing.
Yeah, like I'll put like if you want to improve performance, like just make sure you have those baselines done. Like the vast majority of people don't need supplements. Like unless you're telling me you're sleeping well, you're hydrating well, and you're eating well, like, and then we can look at your programming. And then like if you really want to hit like higher levels, then we can talk about supplements. But do you really need them? Like
it's washing your car in the rain in a lot of instances, right? It's like having bulletproof coffee and staying up until 2 a.m. and skipping random meals, not purposely fasting, but skipping random meals, and then not exercising, not hitting baseline movement requirements to physiologically stay alive, and then taking, vitamin B12 and something else. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't. You're missing the point on what the supplement is to do. It's to supplement performance and what you already have that's going really, really well, that you're trying to get an athletic extra 0.5% to compete with other people that may or may not be it's crazy. It's a wild industry.
But that's the part of it that comes back to just trying to get people to understand, like, no, I think that's also where we try to make things more complex than they need to be. And it's like, no, let's make it simple. Like, are you eating well? Are you sleeping well? Are you hydrating well? Are you moving well? Like, those are the fundamental, like, let's get back to that. And then we can ladder on top of that. We can build and go from there. But if you don't have the fundamentals down, then that's your lowest hanging fruit. Like, don't go buy something that may or may not do anything for you. Just let's look at how you're eating. Let's see what changes we can make there.
Well, I want to be respectful of your time, but we're coming up, surprise, on like 2 hours. I knew this would happen. But I want to finish with, I want to hear more about what you're doing now. And what led you to leave Equinox?
So I can start with the latter and go to the former question.
Yep.
So leaving Equinox, I will just say it may not have been by choice. So
interesting.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
I won't go into a ton of detail with it, just because it's not as interesting as it sounds. It just basically, they were looking to go in a different direction than I was looking to go in, and that direction didn't include me. And so, they basically said, hey, we're eliminating your position, and this is what we have for you. What do you want to do? And so it was just as simple as that. Like, fundamentally just went in a different direction. And so I left the company. All right. It was kind of,
when I heard that this happened, and again, I want to be respectful of you and your position. And the goal here is not to dog Equinox. I don't think either of us have anything bad to say about the company. When I heard that, I was shocked because, and maybe I was selfishly shocked because so much of my career had been impacted by you being there, but you also were a key component of developing a lot of what TRX was, and a lot of you is expressed in that, and the consideration factors that we were taking into account as coaches, onboarding new clients and everything like that. I mean, without going into the entire process, when I found that out, I felt like there would be a big like going away party kind of thing, and like, everyone wear a special outfit and say bye to Matt, and then it was just like, oh yeah, Matt Berenc left, and I was like, I was like, the Equinox left.
Well, I don't think it helped that it was also like right at the front end of the pandemic, where that happened at a pretty bad time. But yeah, I mean, it just, and exactly, I wouldn't be where I'm at without the 15 years I spent at Equinox. And so agreed. I'm not here to talk bad, because I had a very good experience during my time there. It's just, companies grow and evolve, and no matter how long you've been with the company, and I know people that were with the company for longer than I that helped develop it greater than I, and they moved on as well. And I think it just got to a point where Equinox was looking to go in one direction, and I had felt this for a while on my end. Philosophically, I don't think it was the direction I particularly wanted to go in, and it ultimately, what I will say is ultimately worked out well for me. Like I'm happy where I'm at now. I'm happy with what I get to do. And I truly appreciate everything that I learned and did and was able to do, and the opportunities I had by working with Equinox and working for Equinox, and the people I was able to meet, such as yourself. Like these are things that I would never give up. And so, yeah, it was just something that was bound to happen at some point. I was 15 years with the same company. I guess at some point in time, we got to switch and adjust.
And that brings us to this exciting new chapter, right? I mean, so pandemic hits. Pandemic was wild for everyone. It was probably, in my eyes, it had to be craziest for coaches in a lot of respects, because our business went from being in person forever to overnight it was no longer in person, and then it was not allowed to be in person for over a year and 15. Here we are, and I love it. I think that some of the greatest things that have happened in the fitness industry happened over this past year and a half, and I think that things got pushed forward in a direction that were inevitable, but maybe more on like the 50-year time scale, and people's acceptance of the virtual platforms, digital platforms, in-home fitness, a willingness to carve out space, time, energy to build home gyms, or to create space in their living room, to acquire equipment. I mean, all the positive signals that people were sending that like this mattered to them. It's not global, but it's very different. And now you have people, we're on a year and a half, outside of this, coming up on 2 years, and they've carved out entirely new positive weekly, like high consistency habits for themselves that they do not miss. And that was a hard part as coaches in the past. You have travel time, you have, a million different factors that go into your fitness routine and health being able to be accomplished. And now it's kind of solved. So what happened for you through that year? What exciting things came about? Where did you pivot and change? And then what's kind of on the future here with your new endeavor?
Yeah. So one thing, and it is one of the things that it was one of my hopes of the pandemic early on, and I think it is coming a bit to fruition, is exactly what you just called out. Because facilities were closed and because you couldn't go to the gym, it put more onus on the individual to like, okay, you got to own your own fitness. If you still want to work out, you got to figure out how to do it on your own. And it forced the hand of building healthy habits. There are definitely plenty of people out there that I'm sure fell off and just didn't do anything, but it put a lot more people in a position of like, well, I guess I don't need to go to the gym to do this. I guess I can do this at home. Or if I guess I can purchase this, nominal amount of equipment and really get at it and maintain. And that to me was one of the things as a positive, out of the myriad of negatives of the pandemic, as a positive that could potentially come out of it, is it put people in a position to where they could own more of their own health and wellness and fitness journey. Because they realize like, I don't need to go to this separate place or have this offloaded to somebody else. I can own it myself. Right. Same with the trainer who thought, I always have to go to the gym, seeing that well, I can do this virtually. I can do this effectively, and start making this hybrid type of lifestyle where maybe they do see some people live and now they see some people virtually. It creates a better balance to a trainer's life. Because I mean, we've all experienced it. Like, I remember being in the gym at 5 a.m. and not leaving until 9 p.m. And that's a grind of a day. You know, and I know you can say the same. So yeah, so that I just wanted to echo that sentiment that you called out. So for myself, where I'm at now is, shortly after leaving Equinox, I had the great opportunity to really pivot and start working for the company I work for now as the VP of Education, FORME. And it's kind of, on social, it's called this is FORME Life. But basically it's a at-home, in-home fitness company where we're focused on you having your facility in your home, you having your ability to train in the comfort of your own space, on your own time, on your own dime, to be able to actually, have that as a consistent part of your lifestyle. And so I've been working with FORME for now a year and a couple months now. So I started with them in September of 2020. So, so it's been just a little over a year, and it's been a great experience. It's a phenomenal company to work with. The founder and owner, Trent, like he's super supportive of, making sure that we're doing the best work we can and putting the best product out there. And that's what he wants. Like he came to it with the mindset of, like, he was somebody that trained. So I guess I'll take a step back and talk about what FORME is. I just jumped right into it. So FORME is an at-home fitness device where you can consume on-demand content to train along with, or you can be connected with a personal trainer live to do live virtual one-on-one. And it's designed by, I always butcher his name. His first name I get right, Yves Bahar. He's an architectural designer, kind of well known in the design world, who helped us design it as a kind of full-length mirror to where it also elegantly fits into your home, which is one of the things that kind of sets us apart, where you can have it in your home. And we get this feedback from our users now, where if it's not on, it just looks like a really, really nice mirror. Right. But once it turns on, it's got, phenomenal speakers, 4K imagery, and you're able to, see the content or connect with your trainer live through that in a large scale visual. And so from our end, one of the things that I focus on is the live one-on-one experience, where it is, bringing on a team of trainers to work with their clients through this platform. And part of doing that is obviously to support our users and support our clients and members, to give them the best fitness experience possible. But we're very much focused on the trainer's experience as well, and changing their career and kind of what the career life cycle is for a trainer, where they can actually work from home. They can have that remote experience. They can actually have that quality of life that's always talked about but never experienced, because now they don't have to go and grind out 15 hours on the strength floor. They can do it from their house and build their career as they want it to be. Yeah. And so that's one of the things that we're setting up. And it's a big point of focus of mine, is helping set up the training experience, the live one-on-one trainers. And then also I get to now explore different worlds that I just never gotten into, where I work on the on-demand side, guiding the strength content that we put out there. And I work with our engineers, helping develop, like, how does this product come out, and what is it, how does the user interact with it, and how do we serve up the right type of programming and the interaction, that we want them to have.
So do you guys, I would imagine this is, so the other products in the market that I can think of are like Tonal, right? So Tonal is like, it sounds like the differentiating factor between you two is that Tonal is pretty equipment forward. So it's like, it takes up space, it takes up room, it has everything that you need. Yours is more aesthetically pleasing. And I can already imagine in my head, maybe the two different markets that these completely appeal to, right? There's people that just don't want equipment in their house, in their living room, in their space. And having something sleek that's awesome, that looks great, it completely accomplishes that. It's the Equinox experience of in-home gym mirrors, right?
Yeah.
From the trainer and client side of it, that's obviously one facet of this, right? Is that you have this one-on-one coaching experience somewhere. Like I run my business through Zoom now, so I will coach my clients in their home gym as you are there, but I'm here.
Mhm.
And so you're improving the quality of life for the trainer because they get the flexibility. The client on the other side of it gets a better experience than looking through Zoom, to be honest.
Mhm.
So it elevates both parties there.
Yep.
Are you also working on something like a marketplace? Because I feel like within this new space, right, the more people that get, there's a transition going on.
Yeah.
Like whether you're accepting it or not, we are moving towards people accomplishing all their end results from
Mhm.
just being at their own home. You really don't need to be in a fitness facility to accomplish what you need. And you have companies now like, like Trainer Road and Train Heroic and all these brands out there that are building amazing platforms that are digital forward. So you can go
Mhm.
on to Train Heroic and you can find really quality programs from some of the most sought after coaches. So
Yeah.
will something like Form function as a marketplace where I could go up to it, let's say in my house, and be like, oh, I want to do, MMA coaching with Phil Daru, or I want to work on functional movement patterns with Matt Berenc, and kind of like swipe and select and do things that way? Or how does this, like, it sounds like you're at the genesis of it, right?
Yeah.
Where does this like blossom into?
And then that's exactly it. So we are at the genesis of it. One of the benefits of being in the tech space and in this digital space is once you have the design of your hardware, a lot of the changes you want to make and the progressions you make are software based, and those can be quicker and easier to come by.
Right.
But to your point, like, we are going to be providing an opportunity for somebody like yourself can come on it. We can hire trainers, bring them on. They can bring their clients with them. It becomes a platform. Now they have a better way to work with their clients, but also we'll have people that'll buy our device, buy the studio or studio lift,
Mhm.
and they won't have a trainer, but they'll want to work with a trainer. And this will also be an avenue for people to gain business and gain new clients and work with them. So somebody can find a trainer to work with through our platform and really start to grow and develop, on the trainer side, their business, and the client gets a quality trainer to have access to. Beyond that, we have the on-demand content, so where we will have programming there to where if somebody wants to follow a program towards a specific outcome, they'll be able to have a list of programs to choose from.
That's so rad. Do you I guess this is more along the existential lines of things, but do you ever think about that we're just getting more and more siloed from one another? Like you and I our career was grown on relationship building, rapport building, trust, face-to-face interaction. And I truly loved that part of it. I think it's probably been the hardest thing to adjust to over the past year, is like really accepting that despite, like, I literally feel like I'm in front of you right now. I mean, it really doesn't at this point, which creeps me out in and of itself, feel like we're far apart. But you're in Los Angeles, I'm in San Diego. As you have more and more things across different industries that will blossom into this, where it's another experience that we're taking away that human to human component, and we're siloing ourselves into these, like, well, I'm just going to get up and I'm going to do my like workout to maintain baseline fitness levels to stay alive. And then I'm going to turn and like, now I'm on my computer, and then I'm going to turn and now I eat my food. And then like I unplug and go, watch TV. How does thinking about that play into your desire to grow what's truly amazing? Because it does have the opportunity to impact millions of lives instead of just 15 lives,
So you're absolutely right. That is a question that early on, I thought through the same points that you're calling out. And so I think that one, from the training side of it, it's incumbent upon us to create environments where we can still create a community. So just because to put a note on it, like, just because I'm training somebody virtually doesn't mean there can't be a way to create a community within their own space. And this is a part of how we can now use our platform as coaches and as trainers to encourage them to see that part of their fitness and wellness journey, is that community aspect of it. And so this could be encouraging the client to go on, get your friends, go on a group hike. That's your homework for this weekend. Or, bring your friends in and they can do the workout with you. Like, that's part of this is also being able to bring people together and have them do workouts together. So, if my wife's home and say I'm a client and my wife wants to jump in, we're both there, and that becomes a group dynamic. So I think the call out is spot on, and it's something that we have to be very sensitive to, because we don't want to continue to remove human connection and contact. But I think that puts it just front and center of being thoughtful on how do you go about reinforcing that. And to your point, like, you got to be more thoughtful of how you building rapport with that person, how you staying connected to them, what are the different kind of spider webs of connection that you can create, how can you reinforce them to be connected with others. Now it just expands what our points of focus are. And so it's something that we can't let get off our radar, because if we do, then you absolutely you get into that environment of that world where you call that like, well, I'm here now, and take a 90-degree turn to be here, now take a 90-degree turn to be like, you never leave your bubble. And
you drink your Soylent, you do your workout, you spin
Exactly.
around in your chair. But then therein lies this other futuristic problem, which is that at some point we've siloed ourselves so much that we end up with the worst problem of all, which is the psychological trauma of no longer being able to have human interaction.
Yeah.
Which is why we're like trying to improve movement proficiency, everything, so we can go and do things together. So you can go on a hike together, you can go on a run, you can do a triathlon, you can do all these things. And it's a weird time, man.
It is. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where our bodies and our physiology keeping up with the environment that's getting developed. And so part of that is also now our psychology keeping up with the environment that's being developed. And yeah, unfortunately, technology can outpace us quite well.
Yeah.
And so I think from us as trainers, coaches, health and wellness professionals, it's incumbent upon us to be very forward on how do we encourage that connection? How to, like, we're not, I'm not saying we need to become psychologists and like dive into their deepest problems,
right.
But we understand, we know, like, okay, get out there. And it makes it seem simple, but it can have a significant amount of impact. Hey, get out there for a hike, go sign up for this triathlon. Like, part of our training is to open up your window of opportunity to do more things than you thought you could. Now go do those things that you now can do. And that's now part of that's going to be recruiting, pulling in their family, pulling in their friends. So on us in terms of trainers, it's not just learning, getting to know the individual that we work with, but who's their significant other? What's their family like? Who are their friends? Can you be connected with them, not to make them clients, but to bring them as part of your team and supporting that individual? So that way you are bringing the whole bubble into that sphere of wellness, and not just it's you and me, two sides of the camera, and that's it.
Right. And that's too, I think that's a wonderful point, especially to any trainers that are listening that run a virtual business, is to encourage, again, not from a business generation standpoint, but a genuine standpoint of, hey, get family involved. Like, we'll do 2 for 1. It doesn't matter. Just get more total people moving. And on the flip side of the camera, as a coach, get out there and do training sessions with other people. If you have a home gym, invite other people over, because the one thing that I did notice right away when Equinox closed its doors and we got pushed into the virtual space unexpectedly and adapting to that, it was a very stark loss of community, whether it was community from coworkers or community from just feedback that I would hear from clients. Like, I didn't know how much I would just miss seeing people from the gym. And you think about, I mean, you were at Equinox Santa Monica when you started. I was there as well. It was a very special little community. I mean, people really do identify with that as their people, their circle, because it's outside of their work, but it is a place that all of Santa Monica would come together to pursue the betterment of their body and their health. And so when that was stripped away, you saw a lot of it spill out into the Palisades parks and people walking way more, which is so cool. But it's just a note to, you can get sucked into the chair in any industry, whether it's a fitness industry or, some finance job, anything corporate. It's on you and it's on me and it's on every person to make sure that we do take care of ourselves by prioritizing, 10,000 steps a day as a minimum, or whatever it may be, to just gamify getting out there in the community and doing things that you love with the people that you care about.
Well said. I completely agree. Yeah. It's going to take effort, but the payoff will be great.
Yeah. Well, I want to, again, be respectful of your time, but please, again, any kind of plugs or information about FORME, where they can find you, how they can hear about it, read about it, all the social plugs, everything.
So For myself, you can always, the easiest way, I'm not fancy with my naming conventions. Like you can find me at Matthew.Berenc. Like that's pretty much any social media handle I have. That's where you can find me. For FORME, go to our website, formelife.com. The Instagram handle, the social handle is This Is Form Life. To see a lot of the cool stuff we're doing within our company and like the type of content we're putting out there, or the things that we're trying to evolve and just push forward within the fitness industry, that'd be probably one of the better places to go, because there's a lot of cool people that are working on our platform, and we're excited to see what's going to be coming out. So, and yeah, to that end, if anybody has a question, or if I can ever be of service to anybody, reach out to me. Like I said, I got 3 small kids, so it may take me a little bit of time to get back to you, but I'm always happy to help.
Awesome. Well, Matt, as I said at the beginning, I'll say it again. I appreciate so much your time. It's a genuinely awesome conversation to have with you. I feel like there's a trillion questions that I didn't even get to ask, more that will form over the next 24 hours. And I think it's inevitable that we hop on here and do this again in the future.
I'm all for it. Yeah, nice. I'm down.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.